The morning sun filtered through the towering windows of the county courthouse, casting long shadows across the polished marble floors. The air was cool, tinged with the faint scent of wax and old paper, and the hum of quiet conversations filled the atrium. Lawyers in pressed suits hurried past, their briefcases swinging, while clerks shuffled files behind a wooden counter. Amid the orderly chaos, Marcus Tate, a black man in his late 30s, stood near a bulletin board, his posture steady but his eyes heavy with focus. His navy blazer was slightly worn at the cuffs, his tie a muted gray, and his shoes bore the scuffs of countless walks through these halls. His face was composed, but a quiet resolve burned beneath the surface, a testament to a life spent navigating spaces where he was often the only one who looked like him. Marcus was here for a routine court appearance, representing himself in a minor case, a traffic violation that had spiraled into a citation for obstructing a public roadway. It was a charge born of a misunderstanding, a moment when he paused on a sidewalk to help an elderly woman with her groceries, only for a passing officer to misinterpret his actions. The ticket should have been dismissed, but the officer's report painted Marcus as defiant, and now he faced a fine and potential community service. As a lawyer who'd spent years defending clients in this very courthouse, Marcus knew the system's quirks, but he also knew its biases, how a black man's presence could be twisted into a threat. He adjusted his blazer, checking his watch. The hearing was in 10 minutes and he'd prepared meticulously, his legal pad filled with notes and precedents. His daughter, Aisha, was at home with his sister, probably sketching in her notebook, her latest drawing inspired by the vibrant murals at their local community center. The thought of Aisha's smile steadied him, grounding his nerves as he headed toward courtroom 3B. The courtroom was stark, its oak benches worn smooth by years of use. The walls were bare save for a faded state seal above the judge's bench, and the air carried the faint must of old wood. Marcus took his seat at the defendant's table, his legal pad open, his pen poised. The gallery was sparse, a few spectators, a clerk typing at a desk and a bailiff standing rigid by the door. The judge, Harold Grayson, a white man in his 60s with a stern face and thinning hair, entered with a rustle of robes, his gavel tapping sharply to call the session to order. State versus Marcus Tate, the clerk announced, her voice echoing in the quiet room. Marcus stood, his voice clear and measured. Marcus Tate appearing pro se, Your Honor. Grayson's eyes flicked over Marcus, his lips pursing slightly. Proceeding without counsel, Mr. Tate? Bold choice. His tone carried a hint of condescension, a microaggression Marcus recognized but didn't acknowledge. He'd faced judges like Grayson before, men who saw his law degree and still assumed he didn't belong. Yes, Your Honor, Marcus replied, his gaze steady. I'm prepared to present my case. The prosecutor, a young white woman named Ms. Carter, rose, her file open. Your Honor, Mr. Tate is charged with obstructing a public roadway on June 12. Officer Daniels reported that Mr. Tate refused to comply with orders to move, displaying defiant behavior. Marcus's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. Your Honor, I respectfully request to present evidence. The officer's report is inaccurate. I was assisting an elderly pedestrian, as corroborated by a witness statement and security footage from a nearby store. Grayson's eyes narrowed, his fingers tapping the bench. I'll hear the prosecution first, Mr. Tate. You'll have your turn. Carter laid out the officer's account, her voice clipped, emphasizing Marcus's alleged defiance. She projected a grainy photo of Marcus standing on the sidewalk, his hands raised in explanation, the elderly woman barely visible. This shows Mr. Tate obstructing the path, refusing to comply, she said. Marcus stood, his voice calm but firm. Your Honor, that photo is misleading. The footage shows I was helping Miss Clara Thompson, who needed assistance with her groceries. I wasn't obstructing, I was ensuring her safety. Grayson leaned back, his expression skeptical. You're a lawyer, Mr. Tate. You know better than to argue with an officer. Sounds like you brought this on yourself. The words landed like a slap, the courtroom's silence amplifying their weight. Marcus felt the heat rising in his chest, the familiar sting of being judged not for his actions but for his skin. The bailiff shifted, his hand resting on his belt, a subtle reminder of the power imbalance. The spectators whispered, their murmurs a low hum, but no one spoke up. I followed the officer's instructions, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the anger simmering beneath. I identified myself, explained the situation, and complied fully. The footage will confirm this. Grayson waved a hand, dismissive. I've heard enough about your footage. Officer Daniels is a trusted member of this community. I'm inclined to believe his account. Marcus's breath caught, his legal pad trembling slightly in his hand. He'd expected resistance, but Grayson's blatant bias was a gut punch. He pressed on, citing case law and presenting Ms. Thompson's written statement, but Grayson's eyes glazed over, his attention drifting to the clock. "Enough," Grayson interrupted, his tone sharp. "Mr. Tate, your behavior escalated a simple situation. I'm finding you guilty. Fine of $500 and 40 hours of community service. Next case." The gavel struck, the sound echoing like a door slamming shut. Marcus stood frozen, the weight of the verdict pressing against his chest. The fine was steep, the community service a burden, but the real punishment was the injustice, the dismissal of truth, the assumption of guilt. The prosecutor gathered her files, avoiding his gaze. The bailiff stepped closer, his presence looming as if daring Marcus to protest. Marcus gathered his papers, his movements slow, deliberate. "Your Honor, I respectfully request a reconsideration," he said, his voice low but unyielding. "The evidence." "Denied," Grayson snapped, already turning to the next file. "Move along, Mr. Tate. You're wasting my time." The spectators' whispers grew louder, a mix of shock and sympathy, but the courtroom's machinery rolled on, indifferent. Marcus walked out, the marble floors cold beneath his feet, the sunlight streaming through the windows now harsh, unforgiving. He thought of Aisha, waiting at home, her sketches a burst of color in a world that often felt gray. The thought kept him moving, kept the anger from consuming him. Outside, the city buzzed with life. Cars honking, vendors calling, pigeons scattering across the plaza. Marcus paused, taking a deep breath, the verdict replaying in his mind. He'd faced bias before, but this was personal, a stain on his record, a challenge to his integrity as a lawyer and a father. He pulled out his phone, texting his sister to check on Aisha, then headed to his office, a small space above a community center where he offered pro bono legal aid. The office smelled of coffee and old books, its walls lined with photos of HBCU alumni events and Aisha's drawings. Marcus sat at his desk, the verdict's weight settling into his bones. He'd appeal, of course, he knew the law, knew the process, but the injustice burned, a reminder of how the system bent against men like him. He opened his laptop, drafting the appeal, his fingers steady despite the storm inside. Weeks passed, the appeal moving slowly through the system. Marcus kept working, defending clients who faced their own battles with bias, evictions, wrongful arrests, voter suppression. Each case fueled his resolve, each client a mirror of his own struggle. At home, Aisha sensed his tension, her hugs tighter, her drawings bolder, one depicting a black man in a robe, a gavel in hand, justice in his eyes. One evening, as Marcus reviewed case files, his phone buzzed with an email from the state judicial board. He opened it, his breath catching. It was an invitation to interview for a vacancy on the state appeals court, a position opened by a retiring justice. Marcus had been recommended by a mentor, a retired judge who'd seen his work at the community center. The opportunity was staggering, a chance to shape the law, to challenge rulings like Grayson's from the inside. The interview process was grueling, panels of attorneys, written exams, public forums. Marcus prepared relentlessly, his nights spent studying while Aisha slept, her drawings taped to his desk for inspiration. He faced skepticism, some panelists questioning his experience despite his years in court, their eyes lingering on his skin. But Marcus's answers were sharp, his passion undeniable, rooted in a vision of justice that saw every person, not just the privileged. Months later the call came. Marcus was at the community center teaching a legal clinic when his phone rang. He stepped outside, the autumn air crisp, the city's skyline glinting in the distance. The voice on the line was formal, congratulatory. "Mr. Tate, you've been appointed to the state appeals court. Congratulations, Justice Tate." Marcus stood still, the words sinking in, a tide of emotion rising in his chest. He thought of Aisha, of his clients, of the courtroom where Grayson's gavel had struck. He thanked the caller, his voice steady, then called his sister, his words breaking with joy. That night, he and Aisha celebrated with pizza, her laughter filling their small apartment, her latest drawing, a judge in a robe, standing tall, propped on the table. The swearing-in ceremony was held in the state capitol, a grand hall with vaulted ceilings and stained glass windows. The room was packed, judges, lawmakers, community leaders, and Aisha in the front row, her eyes wide with pride. Marcus stood at the podium, his black robe crisp, his hand on a Bible passed down from his grandfather, a civil rights activist. The oath was solemn, the applause thunderous, but Marcus's mind was on the work ahead. His first case on the appeals court was a review of a conviction. A black teenager sentenced harshly for a minor theft, the judge's ruling eerily similar to Grayson's. Marcus read the file late into the night, the courthouse quiet, its halls echoing with history. The evidence was thin, the sentence disproportionate, the bias clear in the transcript's dismissive tone. Marcus drafted the opinion, his words precise, overturning the conviction and ordering a retrial with explicit instructions for fairness. The ruling sent ripples through the legal community, a signal that Justice Tate was watching. Marcus didn't stop there. He advocated for judicial training, mandatory sessions on implicit bias, drawing from his own experience in Grayson's courtroom. He partnered with HBCU law programs, mentoring young black attorneys, their faces reflecting his own hunger for change. He spoke at community forums, sharing his story, his voice resonating with those who'd faced their own gavels. One day, Marcus received a case file from his old county courthouse. It was an appeal from a defendant Grayson had sentenced, a black man fined for disorderly conduct after questioning a police stop. The parallels were stark, the bias unmistakable. Marcus reviewed the evidence, his pen circling Grayson's curt dismissal of a witness. He wrote the opinion, overturning the ruling, his words a quiet rebuke of the system that had failed him. The opinion reached Grayson, now nearing retirement, his office smaller than Marcus's new chambers. Sources said he read it silently, his face tight, the weight of Justice Tate's name on the page a reminder of his error. Marcus didn't seek Grayson out. He believed in systems, not vendettas, but the ruling was justice enough, a step toward accountability. Marcus also launched a voter rights initiative, inspired by his client's struggles with suppression. He worked with activists to challenge restrictive ID laws, their rallies vibrant with Afrofuturist art and gospel choirs, symbols of black resilience. Aisha joined, her sketches adorning campaign flyers, her pride in her father alight in his long days. One evening, Marcus walked through the community center, now expanded with a legal aid wing funded by his advocacy. The walls were lined with murals, black judges, activists, dreamers, painted by local artists. Aisha's latest work hung prominently, a judge breaking chains, the words "Justice Prevails" in bold script. Marcus stopped, his breath catching, the memory of Grayson's gavel fading against the promise of this moment. Back at the courthouse, Marcus stood in his chambers, overlooking the city. The skyline was his now, not just to judge but to reshape. He'd faced the system's worst, its bias, its gavels, and turned it into something better. Not for himself, but for every black man who'd stood in a courtroom, felt that same weight and deserved more. This story is inspired by real events. Discrimination happens every day. But so does change. Be part of it. They sentenced him unfairly. They underestimated him. But Marcus Tate showed them who he was, and who we can be. This story moved you, please share it. Let's spark conversations for justice. Subscribe for more stories that inspire change. Comment below with your experiences or ideas for reform. Together we can build a city, a world where every voice is heard.